Okinawa, land of jungles, mountains, and a language totally incomprehensible to Japanese speakers. So what language is spoken on the island then? Well, Japanese is commonly spoken on the island, however it is not the indigenous language of the island. Instead there are two, one in the north, which is Kunigami, and in the south is Central Okinawan. However, before we get too far into this, as this is episode 1 of a new series, I will explain how each video is going to work. I will take one language or dialect and start with the oldest available evidence or theory given towards that language or dialect and its speakers, and I will track through both the language and the speakers as they've changed and travelled right up to the modern day. And for this episode, the language we will be following is Central Okinawan. Let's start at the beginning then. The earliest evidence available is not in fact from linguistics, but rather, in this situation, from genetics. The majority of Central Okinawan speakers these days can trace their roots genetically to the East Asian mainland, especially around the Yangtze Delta, at around 3,100 years ago. And the language these people would have spoken is unknown. It's older than Proto-Japonic. In fact, it's so much older that it would be impossible to draw any conclusions about what it might have sounded like. In fact, it might not even have been related to any modern Japanese language, and the language itself might have appeared later. However, over the course of the next 700 years or so, this population that originated from the Yangtze Delta migrated northwards until they reached this area of the world. It is here that we can actually start talking about the language itself. The Japonic language family, which Central Okinawan does belong to, has two main branches: Japanese and Ryukyuan, which is the one Central Okinawan belongs to. Theories place this split in a language from anywhere between 2,500 to 2,200 years ago. However, it's the earlier part of this range that is usually preferred. This in fact raises 2 points. Firstly, the language itself, Proto-Japonic, very likely would have been spoken in southern Korea rather than on Japan itself, and that by the time the language actually migrated onto the Japanese islands, it would already have split into its two main branches, Japanese and Ryukyuan. The second point is about an extension to the language family hypothesis, in which there might actually have been three branches to the Japonic languages, one of which would have been the one that remained on the continental mainland after the Japanese and Ryukyuan speakers had already migrated onto Kyushu. To explain this third branch of the language family, we have to first fast forward a few hundred years. Now the region is home to a nation known as the Kara Confederacy. Found in their territory are several fragments of written text that seem to be in a language that resembles a Japonic one. The name given to this language is Pre-Kara, and it would have been the mainland branch of the Japonic language family after the rest of the speakers migrated. However, this language probably not actually related to the language spoken by the Kara Confederacy, it just happens to have existed in the same area. This means that 2,300 years ago, before the Japonic languages had even spread onto the Japanese island, the language had already diversified into three separate branches that would ultimately determine the modern layout of the language family. The next step of our journey happens around 2,300 years ago, when the Yayoi people arrived on Kyushu Island, and with them came rice farming, a new culture, and the Japonic languages. It is generally believed that the Yayoi people were the first Japanese speakers on the islands of Japan. It is also about this point that linguists have actually successfully reconstructed a phonemic inventory for a Japonic language, in this case Old Japanese. It's not actually a Ryukyuan language, however it is a dialect because all the Japonic languages at this point are still dialects of each other. Therefore, this language would be quite similar to what would have been the ancestor to Central Okinawan at this date. Several interesting things appear when you actually start looking at this reconstruction. The language has 13 consonants, which is nothing particularly strange. However, when it comes to the vowels, things get more complicated. There are, in fact, two general schools of thought currently among linguists about the rather bizarre vowel system of Old Japanese. One idea is that there are 8 vowels in the language. They would have been a, u, I, and yeah. This would simply mean that the Japanese language had a lot of vowels once and have lost them since. However, the other idea is even more interesting because it constructs Old Japanese with only 5 vowels, which are a, u, I, and u. However, it would also say that Japanese at this point had vowel harmony, which may have been picked up from Proto-Koreanic when the language was still spoken on the mainland. Either way, this vowel harmony, or this extended vowel system, both began collapsing very quickly within Japanese, because almost immediately after Old Japanese became a written language, several of the vowel distinctions were lost. After arriving on Kyushu Island, the Yayoi people would spend the next few hundred years expanding across the rest of Japan, with the 2 branches splitting off into the north and south. It is also at this point that we will say goodbye to the Japanese branch of the language family and concentrate exclusively on Ryukyuan. As the Ryukyuan speakers expanded south through Kyushu Island, they would have encountered indigenous people of the islands at the time, the Jomon people, and the Jomon would have been displaced out of the way with the language gone. However, that language, whatever it might have been, would have had a lasting influence on the Ryukyuan languages. In fact, this is held true for any language spoken on the Japanese islands. As the languages extended even further, around 1,900 years ago, they would have first started expanding to the most northern of the Ryukyuan Islands, which is what gives this branch of language its name. Here, the language group became isolated from the rest of the Japonic languages for almost 1,600 years. During this isolation, the language family also split into 2 groups. The northern ones, which include Central Okinawan, and the southern one. The main distinction made between the 2 language groups, or sub-branches even, is that the northern group use glottalic consonants, which the southern ones don't really use. By the time contact was re-established with Japan in the 1700s, Central Okinawan had already become a truly distinctive language, with more or less the same phonemic inventory as it does today, which are ama, ana, apa, abba, atta, adda, aha, asa, ara, acha, aja, aya, awa, agua, agua, aga, aga, a, aha, I, u, e, o, and a. Each vowel would also have a long counterpart, and there are also several allophonic consonants as well. However, our final step in the journey of Central Okinawan takes a far darker turn. After the 1880s, when the Ryukyuan Islands became officially part of Japan, the Japanese policy at the time for minority languages was one of eradication, and by the time this policy was actually changed after the Second World War, the languages of the Ryukyuan Islands, including Central Okinawan, had almost been wiped out altogether, and today all of them, including Central Okinawan, count as endangered languages with almost no native speakers of the youngest generation. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.